Chapter 839. Dignity can't be exchanged for peace. So that's what's going on here. Xu Qing's eyes glowed with mysterious light. During the numerous times he had attacked Crown Prince Brightsouth, only to have his opponent be resurrected over and over again, he couldn't help but think of the head and the stone lion. He had put on a lot of pressure with the specific purpose of putting the Crown Prince in a very tight spot, thus forcing him to go all out. And that was because the blessing of a god was what enabled the Crown Prince to repeatedly die and be resurrected. It was similar to the inmates in D-132, who were eternally indestructible thanks to the influence of a god. To truly kill Crown Prince Brightsouth, it was necessary to break that blessing. High God Sunfear. Outside of D-132, all of the humans, including Grand Prince, were visibly stunned and were breathing heavily. A look of revulsion and displeasure flashed across the captain's face, and he narrowed his eyes as he looked at the huge eye in the sky. Golden light spilled out of the rift in the sky, sending out beams that touched the land everywhere. The clouds didn't even dare to form. The lava on the ground ceased churning and became solid. All of the natural laws were wiped away, and all the magical laws became nothing. In the presence of a god, there were no such laws. As the rift opened, golden light shone from an eye that couldn't be looked at directly. It contained no emotional fluctuations, but rather was supremely tranquil. It was as if everything else was dust when that eye looked at it. The power of mutagen spread through heaven and earth. Time and space intersected. Life force formed and was then extinguished. It was as if everything that formed could be instantly wiped away. No beginning, no end, no rise, no fall. Because of the gaze, a forbidden region was forming. Burning crimson vines stretched out from the solidified lava, and as they whipped back and forth, faces appeared on them, wailing in agony. Mountains and rivers rose up. To a certain extent, this was very similar to what the broken face would do. However, the broken face would form a forbidden region from the briefest glance, and it was something that couldn't be reversed. Right now, High God Sunfire was creating an embryonic forbidden region. And because it had no foundation, once the gaze vanished, so would the forbidden region. Regardless, the gaze shook everyone and influenced everything. Grand Prince and everyone else started to show signs of mutation, causing looks of pain and disbelief to show on their faces. The captain seemed to be working hard to restrain himself, and just allowed his body to start melting. Xu Qing was also affected. The gaze of the god caused him to blur, and made every inch of his flesh and blood feel like it wanted to rip off of him and be independent. Tendrils of flesh began to grow off his god's state fleshly body. The gaze also caused the crimson vines to wrap around D-132. The god's finger trembled as the cell block blurred. Crown Prince Brightsouth was inside, and all of the magical techniques Xu Qing had been using on him went still. As of this moment, he was actually forming anew. However, though his situation seemed normal, the reality was that he had already lost his undying characteristics. There was nothing extraordinary about him now. His expression was vicious and distorted, and his eyes gleamed with the light of one who had barely survived a deadly ordeal. Heart-filling with madness, he stared at Xu Qing, who was already showing the signs of mutation. I have a blessing from High God Sunfire, human. Underneath the gaze of a god, you're nothing more than a bug. Xu Qing ignored the Crown Prince. He also ignored the flesh tendrils growing off of him, and the sensation of his flesh and blood trying to rip free and be independent. This wasn't the first time he had experienced something like that. Although it wasn't possible to say he was used to it, at the very least, he knew that once the source was gone, all that would ultimately happen would be the loss of a bit of life force. He looked up at the giant eye. Gods weren't to be looked at directly, but with Xu Qing's eyes pitch black from taboo poison, he could look very briefly. Xu Qing took a deep breath and then dispelled his god state. Millions of soul threads unwound rapidly, then converged into the shape of a new body. New novel chapters are published on Letter 192REEWEB and Retroflex, OVEL.com. That body was that of a clay fox. It was tall, impressive, and very lifelike. It was none other than High God Starfire. The moment it formed, Xu Qing lifted his right hand and produced the identity medallion the clay fox had given him. He held it high. The medallion vibrated underneath the gaze of high god Sunfear. Then, boundless starlight spread out all around Xu Qing. It was like a river of stars, filled with twinkling light that became pink fire. The fire of stars abounded. Heaven and earth trembled. The crimson vines stopped moving, and the spreading mutagen was sucked into the Starfear power. Thunderous rumbling erupted in the sky. Crown Prince Brightsouth's face fell. Starfear's God Herald. As the power of Starfear surrounded Xu Qing, he really did become a God Herald, and the highest-ranking type possible. As he stood there, the starlight really did become a blessing, spreading out, moving, until it was a massive vortex. Xu Qing was gambling. He was betting that the eye of an actual god wouldn't really open for a mere void-returning cultivator. This eye had been opened to signify the power of blessing, nothing more. When it came to the giving of blessings, gods wouldn't view void-returning cultivators as any different than mortals. To a certain extent, it wasn't a complete gamble. Xu Qing understood gods more than members of most species. He was fully aware that, given the circumstances, using his soul threads to form a clay fox and then use the identity medallion would be an effective line of defense. It shouldn't matter if the god's eye was real or not. Xu Qing's gamble paid off. The cold gaze of the golden eye landed on Xu Qing and noted the identity medallion. Then the eye slowly closed. The rift in the sky faded away into nothing. The eye was gone. If it came down to Xu Qing, who had an extremely high status as an actual god herald, compared to an unimportant servant, well, it was only natural that the latter could be discarded. The development caused Crown Prince Brightsouth's face to drain of blood. He looked at the eye disappear, then at Xu Qing. He felt defiance, grief, indignation, and a host of other emotions. His biggest secret weapon had turned out to be useless against this opponent. As of now, his special background seemed completely meaningless. It was an outcome he could never have predicted at the outset, no matter what powers of foresight he used. Xu Qing was actually a god herald of Starfear. "This," Crown Prince Brightsouth murmured, glaring venomously at Grand Prince and the other humans. Apparently, he believed that they knew all along about this, but had been pretending not to, thus leading to his mistake. It was too late now. He had lost his undying blessing. He had lost his secret weapon. And then he thought about how ruthless and vicious Xu Qing had been up to this point, and his heart started pounding. Without any hesitation, he turned, burning his energy and blood in a desperate attempt to escape. He wanted to take advantage of the moment the cell block was weakened to get away. In fact, he immediately resorted to a teleportation technique. Of course, there was no way Xu Qing was going to let him get away that easily. Xu Qing's eyes glittered with killing intent. "Eldest brother," he said, waving his hand to send 4 taboo weapons flying out. Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior emerged from hiding, chuckling viciously, either to bolster himself or to frighten the Crown Prince. It was hard to tell. The 4 majestic fingers formed and crushed down toward the Crown Prince. And the captain laughed as blue light flared all around him, spreading through the sky to form a host of sinister mouths, like those of heavenly dogs. They shot directly toward Crown Prince Brightsouth. As the blue light spread, Crown Prince Brightsouth's teleportation activated. But then Xu Qing's divine abilities and taboo weapons arrived. Xu Qing came along. Together with the captain, he closed in on the Crown Prince. One of them attacked viciously with a dagger. The other took a huge bite with his mouth. They didn't need to speak at all to coordinate their movements. It all came naturally. Crown Prince Brightsouth fought back with everything he had. But no matter how he tried to defend himself, it didn't do any good. Ultimately, he screamed as the 4 taboo weapons pierced through his body and blue light corroded his flesh. Then, a long red streak appeared on his throat. A head flew through the air. Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior stabbed him through the forehead. Destruction. But there was no doubt that Crown Prince Brightsouth was an amazing individual. Extermination like this could destroy his fleshly body, but his soul still managed to slip out into the open. As it tumbled to the side, the power of teleport surged, and it disappeared. Xu Qing wasn't worried. He performed an incantation gesture and pointed out, whereupon the 4 taboo weapons vanished, as if they had already locked onto their target. The captain grinned as he waved his hand. 5 chunks of flesh appeared around him as he unleashed a magical technique. An instant later, the soul of Crown Prince Brightsouth appeared back in the very vortex he had just disappeared into. His expression was one of disbelief and despair as he opened his mouth to cry out. He wasn't fast enough. 4 taboo weapons appeared around his soul. The saber slashed, the battle axe ravaged, the trident exterminated, and the spear immolated. A scream rang out, but then faded away just as quickly. Total extermination. The captain emerged from within the blue light, licking his lips. Turning to Grand Prince and the others, he smiled. Xu Qing then shot over to where Crown Prince Brightsouth had just died. Reaching out with a grasping gesture, he caused a host of forbidden mountains to converge overhead. They were Crown Prince Brightsouth's forbidden mountains, and there were nearly 400 of them. When added to the over 300 Xu Qing already had from before, he now had more than 700. This was crushing all obstacles like chaff. This was a spirit that could conquer mountains and rivers. It was shocking and ghastly, to say the least. The human cultivators were shocked to the core and couldn't hold back from turning to Xu Qing and bowing. And yet, some of them also looked at the spot where Crown Prince Brightsouth had died, and they looked anxious. Though none were saying anything out loud, they were all thinking the same thing. Crown Prince Brightsouth's father was extremely powerful and influential, and it seemed highly likely that he would be furious with humankind for killing his son. Xu Qing was aware of that possibility as well. He looked at Grand Prince. Grand Prince didn't say anything for a few breaths of time. Then he looked at the whip marks on his subordinates and thought back to the humiliation they had all suffered. His gaze softened, and he lowered his voice. This was my mistake. I exchanged dignity for disgrace, and that's not peace. The captain's eyes glittered. There's no type of peace that comes without shedding blood. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about an enemy or yourself. After enough blood has been shed, peace will come on its own. 840. Champion struggles. The dome of heaven was peaceful. The lands below were calm. After the dramatic battle, the cloud cover was in complete disarray. Starlight trickled down chaotically from the starry sky, a dappled veil that made everything even more mysterious. The lava was covered with craters and gullies, but they were already filling in. The temperature was rising again. The dramatic battle was over, and things were going back to normal. The only sound was the lingering echo of the words the captain had just spoken. It was rare for him to speak in such a proper and formal way. After he was done talking, he stood with his hands clasped behind his back as he stared off into the distance. The wind drifted down, stirring the captain's hair and clothing. Through the gaps in his flowing hair, it was possible to see a trace of reminiscence and melancholy in his eyes. It was as if he had experienced things that most ordinary people had not. As he stood there, he seemed like a lone commander standing in the middle of a battlefield. All the humans who could see him were moved. There were some people present who had heard of someone named Ernio. After all, though Xu Qing got a 30,000-meter light during the assessment of the heart, the captain got only 1 meter. Truth be told, the captain's achievement was without parallel in history and would likely never be repeated. It was obvious he must have done something very meaningful to lead to that. But now, as his words echoed out, the humans who heard them suddenly viewed this Ernio in a very different way. Grand Prince looked at him deeply, and after achieving a certain level of understanding in his heart, clasped hands and bowed. Though the captain's eyebrows moved up fractionally, his facial expression remained the same as before. Few people would notice that, but all it took was one glance for Xu Qing to realize that the captain was striking a pose. Xu Qing did nothing to ruin the moment. Waving his hand, he sent one of the forbidden mountains to Grand Prince. It was the mountain which had previously been set aside for Grand Prince. "See you at God Mountain," Xu Qing said calmly. He hadn't interacted with Grand Prince previously, but was obviously aware that he was participating in the Great Hunt. And according to the rules, there was no need to try to take first place by getting the most forbidden mountains. Only one was required to meet the qualifications for the round. As for whether or not Grand Prince would be able to keep that mountain long enough, there was really no way for Xu Qing to make a prediction. After handing over the forbidden mountain, Xu Qing headed off into the distance. Continuing to sigh emotionally, the captain went with him. The two of them were soon about to disappear over the horizon. As the humans watched them go, Grand Prince suddenly said, "Region Lord Xu." He clasped hands and bowed at the waist. "I wish you success in your endeavors." He could already tell that Xu Qing's goal was to become a Darkheaven general. If that wasn't his goal, there was no need for him to have so many forbidden mountains. The other humans bowed their heads and bowed sincerely in Xu Qing's direction. Xu Qing stopped and turned. A moment passed, and then he returned their salute. Then he and the captain disappeared over the horizon. He took the dragon chariot with him. Afterward, Grand Prince and the human cultivators exchanged glances. Finally, all gazes came to focus on Grand Prince. As he looked in the direction where Xu Qing had disappeared, he said, "Our new goal isn't to try to achieve peace. We need to focus on gathering intelligence for Region Lord Xu. Let's do whatever we can to make sure he has everything necessary to become a Darkheaven general." With that, Grand Prince made some new arrangements. Afterward, the humans scattered in different directions to start putting together the intelligence reports Grand Prince had mentioned. Time slipped by slowly but surely. News of Crown Prince Brightsouth's death wasn't possible to keep a secret, and within 3 days, everyone was talking about it. At first, it was just a rumor that most people didn't believe. Some people even scoffed at the news, thinking that it was nothing but nonsense. Based on their understanding, given Crown Prince Brightsouth's background and battle prowess, there were few people who had the skill and courage to try to kill him. After all, he was the only son of King Brightsouth. But as the news continued to spread, suspicions began to die down and were eventually replaced by astonishment. That was especially true when people started to realize that Crown Prince Brightsouth hadn't been seen in public since the news started to spread. Before long, virtually all Fire Moon Darkheavens were paying attention to what was now the hottest topic in their lands. Crown Prince Brightsouth was a very influential figure among the Fire Moon Darkheaven people. Whatever he did, people paid attention. For him to suddenly disappear was very telling in and of itself. Eventually, cultivators arrived at the spot where the Crown Prince had fought Xu Qing. As they scoured the area, they eventually turned up clues that proved the rumors true. With the truth confirmed, the news spread with even greater intensity. Crown Prince Brightsouth could actually be dead. Crown Prince Brightsouth's killer is a human cultivator. Someone already figured out who the human cultivator is. His name is Xu Qing. In a very short period of time, a host of rumors raged. And before long, people unearthed details of Xu Qing's past. The more they learned and understood, the bigger the commotion became. Even to the Fire Moon Darkheaven people, Xu Qing's past was absolutely astonishing. He's in charge of the humans, see Sealing County. In the Moonright region, he participated in the killing of a god. In the Night Spirit region, they actually think of him as a god. He killed 7th Prince in the imperial capital of humankind. He was given a sword by their Grand Emperor. One word from him can determine the glory or decline of an entire region. People are saying that he has a demigod magic, a shocking poison, and violet moon authority. He doesn't just have a smoldering god as a Tao protector, he also has the blessing of a real god. What's more, Xu Qing is a god herald of Starfair Temple. Each new rumor that spread caused a huge stir. In a very short time, Xu Qing was becoming quite famous among the Fire Moon Darkheavens. When you added in the slaughter he had carried out as part of the Great Hunt, it ensured that there wasn't a single other participant who didn't hear about him. Before he even reached God Mountain, he was well known by everyone. There was one other important point that came to light, and that was regarding Xu Qing's Forbidden Mountains. As he got closer and closer to God Mountain, more and more people were paying attention to his progress. He really did have a huge amount of forbidden mountains. That, combined with his reputation and the strength that had enabled him to kill Crown Prince Brightsouth, made him the complete center of attention. There were some people who seemed indifferent, some who seemed antagonistic, some who seemed defiant, and some who were indignant. After all, from the perspective of the Fire Moon Dark Heavens, for a human cultivator to get so many forbidden mountains during their holy great hunt was the source of immense and even uncomfortable pressure. No one in their species would consider a lone valiant threat to be very noteworthy considering how weak humankind was in general. But in the hearts of the Fire Moons, the pressure they were feeling became outright humiliation. New novel chapters are published on freewyabenel retroflex.com. Antagonism grew more intense. More and more people were paying very close attention to the situation. Soon, news started spreading about Xu Qing's whereabouts and activities. Xu Qing is traveling straight across the third region. Some white marshes tried to stop him, but they all got killed. He has almost 800 forbidden mountains. Xu Qing just entered the second region. He killed more participants. His mountain count just went past 800. He's very close to the first region. 900 forbidden mountains. He is slaughtering his way across the first region. He's only 5 days away from God Mountain. There are people who saw him from a distance and said that he has a very alarming, baleful aura. The more news spread, the more people started watching Xu Qing's every move. And quite a few Fire Moon cultivators, upon seeing how quickly Xu Qing was rising to prominence, started looking in the direction of King Brightsouth. When all was said and done, his son had died, and that had the potential to be a major catastrophe. But strangely, King Brightsouth didn't do a single thing. However, as news spread of Xu Qing's progress toward God Mountain, there were Fire Moon Darkheaven chosen who started getting very interested in him. People knew that Crown Prince Brightsouth was strong, but he wasn't the best of the best in his generation in the Fire Moon Dark Heavens. After all, there were more than a dozen cultivators in their echelon besides him. The true Fire Moon chosen had a variety of personalities. Some were indifferent to fame and fortune. Some were arrogant and showy. Some kept a low profile. Some were coarse and wild. Some cared deeply about their reputation and would maintain it at any cost. Some were quite the opposite and cared only about getting stronger. Because of the variety of dispositions among the chosen, there were a variety of opinions about Xu Qing. About half a day's journey from God Mountain in the first region, a Fire Moon cultivator strode across the lands clad in a rough hemp robe. 1. He was a lot taller than the average Fire Moon cultivator. He was nearly 15 meters tall, which made him look almost like a giant. He was extremely muscular, with surging energy and blood. Walking along, he seemed like a small mountain and imparted the sensation of being impossible to resist. Every step he took caused the ground to shake. What was more, he walked with earth-contracting manipulation, giving him shocking speed. 2. What was most shocking of all was that he had over 900 forbidden mountains orbiting overhead. The combination of all those things ensured that any who saw him felt shocked to the core and instinctively bowed their heads. One reason for that was his identity. The other was because of his reputation. This person was none other than one of the top 5 consummate chosen among the Fire Moon Darkheaven people. His name was Chu Shishin. 3. Most of the other chosen cultivators participating in the Great Hunt didn't care very much about becoming the champion of the first round. But he was different. His main goal was to become the Darkheaven General. The reason was that he was from the Darkheaven clan, and his clan had produced 6 Darkheaven generals in the past. As he strode forth in his majesty, he eventually reached a mountain range. Standing atop one of the tallest mountains, he looked off toward the horizon, where he could see a golden glow. It wasn't possible to see any details of what was in that golden light, but that was the location of the Fire Moon's God Mountain, which was the ultimate destination in the first round of the Great Hunt. "I'm finally here," he murmured, smiling. Moments later, the air around him rippled as 9 figures stepped out and bowed. "We offer respectful greetings, young lord." Xu Qing nodded and looked away from the horizon. How far away is Xu Qing, and how many forbidden mountains does he have now? One of the 9 figures replied, He's about 6 hours away. As for the forbidden mountains, he has a few more than you, your majesty. Xu Qing licked his lips, and his eyes glittered with interest. Instead of continuing onward, he sat down on a nearby boulder to wait. Producing an earthen jar of alcohol, he took a long drink. Very good. The fact that he killed Crown Prince Brightsouth shows that he's worth his salt. I never liked that prissy Crown Prince. I'm glad he's dead. That said, there's only going to be one champion in round 1, and it's going to be me. 1. The specific kind of robe mentioned could be the Xianxia, robe typical of Qing Dynasty China. It looks like this. Literally, it just means long robe. I'm hesitant to put a lot of stock into the specific words used by the author in describing clothing. I've seen him use 2 completely different words for robe when describing the same set of clothing for one character. So it could just be that he's using the Xianxia word in a general sense to mean a long robe. Or perhaps he envisions the Fire Moon Dark Heavens having a fashion sense that conforms more to Qing Dynasty style than the more ancient style. Regardless, I think what's most significant is that he's wearing a robe of rough hemp, which gives some insight into his personality. Given the description of the variety of Fire Moon chosen in the previous paragraph, it's noteworthy that he's not wearing the extravagant or showy garment you would expect to see on someone who values glory or riches. 2. The earth-contracting manipulation is a real but legendary ability in Chinese/Taoist magic that allows the user to travel great distances with a single step. This type of ability gets mentioned occasionally in Gen works, sometimes using different combinations of characters. 3. Xu Qing. Xu is a surname that does not appear on the list of 100 most common surnames. It's also a common character that means to expand, to push, to develop, as well as to make a rubbing or inscription. She means stone, rock, and Shan means mountain. Madame Deathblade said he sounds like a cold-hearted murderer. However, she also included a sarcastic joke like she often does. If you look at the character for Xu Chinese letter, you can see how it includes the character Shi Chinese letter squished to the right. So his name contains the character for stone, rock twice. And thus she said, he has so many stones in his name. I guess he's a stoner. Ha, ha, ha. Chapter 841, Be Wary of Scams. After Xu Qing's short soliloquy, he took a big drink of alcohol. The 9 figures bowed, then stood aside motionless. All of them were completely willing to follow this young lord's lead. Whether it was his personality or the way he handled himself, the things they had been through together ensured that he had earned their respect. For instance, after learning that Xu Qing had more forbidden mountains than him, he could have called on the power of his clan to get a few more mountains for himself. In fact, even without calling on the powers of his clan, he could have relied on his reputation alone to have forbidden mountains literally handed over to him by others. If he had given the order, his 9 subordinates could have used all sorts of methods to intercept Xu Qing and cause trouble for him. But they knew that their young lord disdained behavior like that. He was obviously interested in this human named Xu Qing and was waiting for him here. He wanted to win the title of champion in an honest and above-board manner. The 9 of them weren't worried about Xu Qing losing. As far as they were concerned, their young lord could crush someone like Crown Prince Brightsouth with hardly any effort. The Dark Heaven bloodline was extraordinary, to say the least. Thus, time passed. Around the time Xu Qing finished his 7th jug of alcohol, bright beams of light appeared off in the distance. 3 people became visible. Xu Qing looked up and burped. Eyes glittering with strange light, he smiled. They're finally here, he said. Xu Qing spotted Xu Qing on the mountain top. The captain's expression turned serious. Little junior brother, this person is no simpleton. Given the fluctuations of his energy and blood, it's clear his fleshly body has reached the great circle of void returning. Looks like his cultivation base is the same. He's only half a step away from being a smoldering god. Based on my understanding of Fire Moon Dark Heaven techniques, cultivators like this prefer to use the blood of godly entities to open up the path to becoming a god. Xu Qing had also noticed that this young fire moon cultivator with his jug of alcohol was an extraordinary individual. His gaze was piercing, and his aura was like a scorching volcano. Xu Qing could already guess the rough level of his battle prowess. He had clearly placed himself in Xu Qing's path on purpose, as if to wait for him. Beyond that, he had more than 900 forbidden mountains. His goal was self-evident. "That's Chu Shishin," said Master Gravesborough, stifling a gasp. After accomplishing the mission Xu Qing had given him before the fight with Crown Prince Brightsouth, he had met back up and continued along with Xu Qing. As a result, he knew full well how terrifying this human cultivator was. The death of Crown Prince Brightsouth had been quite a shock to him. At first, he had been worried about the potential ramifications, but at this point, he'd stopped caring. That said, his calm heart was now more than a little disturbed. He's one of the top 5 chosen among the Fire Moon Darkheaven people. Specifically, he ranks 4th. He's from the Darkheaven clan. He was gifted even as a child and was born with godly power. He was blessed on 5 occasions by the Moonfair Temple, and High God Moonfair even promised to make him a Dharma protector after he becomes a smoldering god. He is one of the shining stars of this generation among us Fire Moon Darkheavens. Although Xu Qing was taking the situation seriously, his facial expression didn't change at all in response to Master Gravesborough's explanation. Not slowing down at all, he headed right toward the mountain atop which Chu Shishin waited. Chu Shishin had fewer forbidden mountains than him, and God Mountain was so close that it was conceivable he could simply rush there and reach the finish line first. But there was no point in doing that. The mountain trembled as Xu Qing landed right in front of Chu Shishin. The captain and Master Gravesborough landed right behind Xu Qing. The captain then projected a message to Xu Qing using a special divine will method. His 9 attendants are no simpletons either. When you start fighting, just buy me some time and I'll capture them. Then, after you win your forbidden mountains, you can head straight toward God Mountain. Xu Qing scanned the area visually, then focused on Chu Shishin, who was still sitting on the boulder. Chu Shishin smiled and tossed him a jug of alcohol. Somewhat surprised, Xu Qing sent out some soul threads to catch the jug and keep it floating in the air in front of him. The fragrance of alcohol emerged from it. Given Xu Qing's skill in the Tao of plants and vegetation, he was able to identify the key ingredients. It had obviously been brewed with the goal of bolstering the flesh and blood. Drinking it would provide both recovery and blessing to the fleshly body. Follow current novels on letter 192, R. E. Macron, EWEBN, O. Cyrillic letter 475, Yael, C. Sigmum. "I never liked Crown Prince Brightsouth," Chu Shishin said. "The fact that you killed him shows that you're strong and daring. I'd like to offer this jug of alcohol to you as a gift." Chu Shishin raised his own jug respectfully to Xu Qing, then took a drink. Xu Qing stood there quietly for a moment. This Fire Moon chosen was different from the others he had encountered on his journey. However, that didn't mean he would casually drink the alcohol. Chu Shishin didn't seem offended. After finishing his drink, he slowly stood. Eyes gleaming, he unleashed his aura, causing wild colors to flash in heaven and earth. Winds swept around him, forming a tempest like a tornado that swept in all directions. The canopy of heaven trembled as a huge vortex formed, filled with shocking bolts of lightning. Because of the close proximity to God Mountain, the supernatural phenomena immediately attracted the attention of the cultivators there. Numerous figures flew out from there, and streams of divine will settled on the area as they waited to see what would happen. Xu Qing's eyes shone with mysterious light as soul threads spread to form a god state around him. His energy also shook the area. Chu Shishin's eyes glittered with excitement as he studied Xu Qing's god state. After muttering to himself briefly, he said, "Let's first set the rules and the stakes. Whoever loses the fight between the two of us gets to keep one forbidden mountain. All the others are up for grabs." Xu Qing was even more surprised. It was now very clear that this Fire Moon cultivator was definitely different from the others he had encountered. "Furthermore, I think an ordinary fight wouldn't be very interesting. I heard you have an extraordinary sealing magic. I also have a sealing method. What if we both use our sealing methods to trap each other? I'll let you seal me, and you let me seal you. Then we'll see which of us can break free first. The person who succeeds is the winner." Xu Qing looked at Xu Qing with bright eyes. After sensing Xu Qing's aura, he got the sense that a fight between the two of them wouldn't be easily resolved. Most importantly, he didn't want to end up injured. After all, this was only the first round of the Great Hunt. He wanted to stay at his peak until the third round, which was when he should be able to get some very powerful godly blood. As Xu Qing considered what to do, the captain rubbed his chin and projected another message. "Be wary of scams, little Ah Qing." As Xu Qing thought about it further, he came to the conclusion that the captain's idea from earlier was too unsafe. As for sealing magics, "Let's do it," he said calmly. He pointed up into the sky, which rumbled as a majestic aura spread out. Then a huge cell block appeared. It started illusory, but rapidly turned corporeal, with energy that poured down like a waterfall, rapidly forming godly might. It was none other than D-132. After it appeared, the entrance opened quietly. Strange cries and screams drifted out from inside. Its arrival attracted a lot of attention from the divine will of the observing cultivators. Xu Qing studied it closely for a time before taking out a three-colored pearl. The pearl glittered as it floated out into the air, rapidly growing larger until it was 300 meters across. It pulsed with sealing power and was covered with glittering godly inscriptions. It seemed to contain intersecting darkness and light that expanded into a golden glow. Then a rift opened on the surface of the pearl, which expanded into a gateway. "In that case, let's begin." Even as he spoke, Xu Qing shot toward the entrance of D-132. Xu Qing also moved toward the opening in the three-colored pearl. Though Xu Qing seemed to be acting rashly, the reality was that he moved in concert with Xu Qing. And thus, they both reached the sealed areas at the same time. An instant later, the entrance of D-132 closed, and the gateway into the three-colored pearl disappeared. They were now both confined in the sealing area created by the other. Inside the three-colored pearl, Xu Qing found himself in a bizarre dimension. At first, everything around him was pitch black as if it were the middle of the night. That darkness was actually a sealing mark. After breaking through it, a second color would appear. Black, white, red. Each color represented a sealing mark. Upon breaking through all the colors, a three-colored hex would appear, which formed an even more terrifying sealing mark. Every intersection of the three colors would make the sealing even more powerful. The overall combination was astonishing. Meanwhile, Xu Qing was facing misfortune and amnesia, plus the inmates and the god's finger. From his perspective, it was both fantastic and extraordinary. After enough time had passed for an incense stick to burn, neither of them had broken free. Rumbling booms echoed out from inside both of the sealed areas. An hour passed, 2 hours. Xu Qing's servants looked surprised. So did the captain. He knew Xu Qing well, and thus came to the conclusion that for him to remain sealed for so long meant that he was up to something. When the 6th hour arrived, the captain's expression flickered, and Xu Qing's servants looked very serious. Although it was impossible to see what was happening inside the sealed areas, given how much time had gone by, it was obvious that breaking free was difficult. Inside of D-132, Xu Qing could no longer remain calm and collected. His hair was disheveled, and he was completely broken down. What was broken down wasn't his body, though, but rather his mind. He had to work constantly to keep the misfortune at bay. But at the same time, he had to deal with the amnesia, which kept making him forget his main purpose. A feeling of nausea and embarrassment was becoming increasingly stronger within him. The inmates were in good condition. He had suppressed and killed them numerous times already. As for the god's finger, he hadn't paid much attention to it. As far as he was concerned, a god as weak as that wasn't very noteworthy. I might be having a tough time, but so is Xu Qing. Furthermore, there's no way he can break free from my sealing. After the three-colored intersection reaches a certain point, he'll find that the final obstacle is something that not even smoldering gods can break through. That's my big gift to him. Such thoughts were what kept Xu Qing stable despite the torment he was suffering. Breathing irregularly, Eyes bloodshot, he kept the slaughter going. After ultimately suppressing the god's finger, he gasped for breath as he strode toward the entrance that had just become visible. Walking out would constitute breaking free of the ceiling. Xu Qing started laughing. Meanwhile, Xu Qing was having just as difficult a time in the three-colored dimension. He had used just about every method he could think of, but there seemed no end to the three colors. Worse, they just seemed to get stronger and stronger. Although he was able to break through, the intersection of the three colors happened over and over again. After succeeding about 300 times, he spotted a figure seated cross-legged up ahead. Xu Qing stopped in place. Smoldering God. Astonishingly, the final obstacle in this three-colored dimension was the soul of a smoldering god. He looked like an old man, and he was guarding this place. Without his approval, no one weaker than a smoldering god would be able to leave. "With me here, you won't be going anywhere," he said coolly, opening his eyes and looking at Xu Qing. Xu Qing didn't say anything. Meanwhile, back in D132, Xu Qing stood in front of the entrance. Above the doorway in front of him was a sphere. It was an ancient sun connected to the door. If the door was opened, the power of a dawning sun would explode out. Upon recognizing what he was looking at, Xu Qing stared blankly for a moment, then gritted his teeth and cursed. "How freaking vicious!" Chapter 842. Don't be impulsive, young friend. If you have something to say, say it. A lot of cultivators were observing the two sealed areas not too far away from God Mountain. In fact, the streams of divine will only continue to increase. Most were various species associated with the Fire Moon Dark Heavens, although members of the main species were also represented. The fluctuations had attracted them, after which they were able to read the clues to see what was happening. The presence of the 9 servants on the mountain peak ensured that everyone realized Xu Qing was involved. As a result, everyone felt fairly calm. They all knew that Xu Qing was from the Darkheaven clan. He had been extraordinary since childhood and was considered one of the top 5 chosen among the Fire Moon Darkheaven people. Once he took action, there was no chance he would lose. The source of this intent is Freewemville, Com Hook. It was true that Xu Qing had a spirit that could conquer mountains and rivers, and had methods that no one could afford to underestimate. But there are always people more important than you, and there is always a heaven beyond heaven. There was no gifted person among humankind, not even one of their chosen, who could compare to the Fire Moon Dark Heavens. The disparity was just too immense. However, as time continued to pass, their confidence began to waver. After 4 hours went by in which Xu Qing had not escaped, surprise began to build in their hearts, and speculation ran wild. Something strange is going on here. This Xu Qing sealing methods are not simple. Xu Qing's 9 servants were really starting to get worried. As far as they could tell, there was only one reason things could be playing out this way, and that was for something unimaginable to exist within Xu Qing's sealing area. There seemed no other explanation for why their young lord would have such trouble breaking free. Master Gravesborough was also feeling a bit hesitant, and was thinking something similar to the 9 servants. Only the captain seemed more relaxed than ever. However, inside was a different story. That Xu Qing is definitely pulling some sort of scam. He seems heroic and honorable, but he could still be full of crap. Otherwise, why else would he have the crappy name Xu Qing? 1. That said, the captain still wasn't truly worried. Considering how long little Ah Ching had been following him around, he had long since transformed from a naive youngster into the type of person that even the captain had a hard time scamming. Considering all the hard training the captain had put him through, it seemed unlikely that a simplistic situation like this would be very troublesome for him. I worked really hard to bring up little Ah Ching, and by now, he's got a broad depth of knowledge. He can suffer through just about anything. But there's one thing he won't suffer, and that's a loss. I bet that crappy Xu Qing is really starting to get worried. The captain's speculation was absolutely correct. Inside of D132, Xu Qing stood in front of the main entrance of the cell block, grinding his teeth and cursing constantly. Damn it. The more he looked at the door, the more helpless he felt. He had already tried numerous ways of skirting the dawning sun to open the door, but every single one of his attempts had failed. No matter what ideas he came up with, there was no way to open the door without detonating the dawning sun. There were even a few times in which the dawning sun had started to pulse with the energy of self-detonation. Zhu Qing couldn't be sure if it was a bluff, but it was completely frightening and left him fearing for his life. At this point, he was starting to go slightly mad. How shameless. I can't believe he put a domain treasure like that in here. What kind of honorable person goes around with a domain treasure? How am I supposed to get past that thingy to escape? Xu Qing, oh, Xu Qing, I really underestimated you. I can't believe you're so sinister. That said, no matter how crafty you are, you're not on my level. I have the soul of a smoldering god in my sealed area. There's no way you'll be able to get past that obstacle. Maybe I'm trapped, but you can keep dreaming if you think you'll get free. Worst case scenario, we have a stalemate. Zhu Qing chuckled coldly. The same Xu Qing who had him grinding his teeth constantly was inside the three-colored ceiling area, frowning as he looked at the three-colored glow ahead of him. Within that glow was a hale and hearty old man. He sat down cross-legged in the light, his expression indifferent, his gaze calm as he looked at Xu Qing. Don't waste your energy, human child. With me here, you can't leave this place. Xu Qing stood there silently. He had employed a number of methods in his attempts to escape, but they were as good as throwing a stone ox into the ocean in dealing with this smoldering god's soul. Whatever divine abilities he used, the old man could negate them with the wave of a hand. What was more, the pressure from the ceiling grew stronger and stronger, almost as if it was connected to the old man. He wouldn't back down, and the seal wouldn't open. From all of this, Xu Qing could only come to the conclusion that this wasn't the soul of an ordinary smoldering god. That was especially true considering how closely tied he was to the sealed area. I bet this place is one of that smoldering god's major worlds. As Xu Qing thought such things, the old man smiled faintly. Sounding very casual, he said, "You most likely already guessed that this place was made from one of my major worlds. Outside of here, I was a smoldering god. Therefore, inside of this major world, I'm a god. That said, I won't go hard on you. Just be obedient and stay put. But if you don't pipe down..." The old man licked his lips, and suddenly his gaze became malevolent. "I'll eat you." Xu Qing looked up and studied the smoldering god soul for a time. His eyes began to glitter. Although he was confident that Zhu Qing wouldn't be able to escape confinement, he also didn't want things to end in a tie, which was where things seemed to be heading. Furthermore, he didn't like having his life threatened. Eyes narrowing, he made a decision. There was one other thing he was prepared to try, and he felt reasonably confident it would work. With his decision made, he tapped his bag of holding to produce an object. Seeing that Xu Qing wasn't giving up, the old smoldering god's face flickered with displeasure, and his eyes gleamed with cold light. In his opinion, humans were just too stubborn. Just as he was about to snort coldly and crush the human, he sensed what was coming out of Xu Qing's bag of holding, and it caused his eyes to narrow. Then, both his gaze and his divine will locked onto the object. It was a command medallion. Is that? The old man's heart started pounding. Emperor Ancient Spirit's netherworld medallion. The tempest within him caused the light surrounding him to start rippling dramatically. Xu Qing was actually somewhat surprised, as he hadn't expected the old man to recognize the medallion. It was indeed the very same teleportation medallion Emperor Ancient Spirit had given him to deliver food. The fact that the old man recognized it was going to make this entire situation easier. Xu Qing held the command medallion aloft, looked straight at the old smoldering god, and calmly said, "This is a teleportation medallion that leads right to Emperor Ancient Spirit. The venerable Emperor Ancient Spirit has been starving for quite a while now. For the past few years, I've been responsible for feeding him. Truth be told, Senior, you would make the perfect snack for Emperor Ancient Spirit. Because you have no fleshly body, H. Cyrillicia, won't get any food stuck between his teeth. Your soul is clearly plump and full of flavor. That said, I'd rather not cause any trouble for you. All you have to do is be obedient and let me pass. But if you don't pipe down..." His gaze hardened as he looked at the old man. "I'll teleport you to Emperor Ancient Spirit to be the next meal." The old man's heart raced as he realized Xu Qing was saying almost the exact same thing that he had just said earlier. He looked at Xu Qing. He looked at the command medallion. He hesitated. Xu Qing's expression was the same as ever. Without giving the old man any time to think the situation over, he pushed down on the medallion, which instantly resulted in bright light shining out. A stream of netherworld energy rushed out, quickly turning into a black vortex. Rumbling sounds echoed out, along with something eerie and corrosive. It was death energy. There was also a sigh that sounded both incredibly hungry and profoundly ancient. So hungry. When the old man heard those words, he shivered dramatically. Xu Qing's eyes gleamed as he prepared to finish the teleportation. Freeweb novel, calm. All of a sudden, a look of decisiveness appeared on the old man's face. Shooting to his feet, he blurted, "Hey now, young friend, we can negotiate. Let's be friends." Xu Qing looked at him coldly. After a brief bit of negotiating, the old man stepped back, smiled, and let Xu Qing pass. "Many thanks, senior." Xu Qing was as polite as ever, so it was no surprise that he would bow thankfully before leaving. The old man's face hardened, but he kept smiling. The next instant, Xu Qing's view of the three-colored dimension blurred, and then he was outside. The moment he was out, numerous gazes locked onto him. Incredulous gasps rang out everywhere. Chu Shishin's 9 servants reacted with visible astonishment. Master Gravesborough looked excited, and the captain grinned. Xu Qing ignored all of that. As he hovered in midair, he looked at D-132. As the guard of the place, all it took was a thought for him to check everything that was happening inside. Then he waved his hand. D-132 vibrated, then blurred. A moment later, Chu Shishin appeared. "You lose," Xu Qing said quietly. Chu Shishin looked at him, all while cursing inwardly. He was also a bit hesitant, as he wasn't sure how Xu Qing had freed himself. Based on his understanding, that should have been impossible. Did the old man actually let him go? Chu Shishin was somewhat at a loss. However, he had spoken some very grand words earlier, and with so many people watching, he would lose all face if he went back on his own agreement. Face darkening, he waved his hand, sending over 900 mountains over to Xu Qing. He kept only one. Xu Qing waved his hand to collect them. Now he had over 1,800 forbidden mountains orbiting overhead in a truly shocking display. Seeing that Chu Shishin had kept his word, Xu Qing turned and flew off in the direction of God Mountain. The captain chuckled and followed. Master Gravesborough excitedly did the same. The shocked onlookers made way for them. After they were off in the distance, the depressed and suspicious Chu Shishin took back his 3-colored sealing pearl. Once it was in his hand, he sent a message inside. "Old Grandpa, why did you let him go?" 2. Furious, the smoldering god replied, "Damn it all. That human brat had a command medallion from Emperor Ancient Spirit. He used it to threaten me. I had no choice. That codger Emperor Ancient Spirit has been starving for years. If I got sent to him, I'd be nothing but a snack. You think this is my fault? What took you so long to get free?" Chu Shishin only felt more depressed now. He had the door sealed with a dawning sun. What was I supposed to do? The old grandpa inhaled sharply, but said nothing further. Chu Shishin likewise said nothing further. 1. The captain makes a somewhat juvenile joke here that my kids would love. Actually, it's the kind of joke I would make and Madame Deathblade would roll her eyes at. It's essentially impossible to render in translation, because it involves wordplay relating to the specific characters in Chu Shishin's name. The captain uses different characters for Chu and she than the actual characters from the name. The tones on the characters are not the same, but the general pronunciation is similar, and the pinyin is the same. Instead of the Chu surname, the captain uses a different character pronounced Chu that means lump, pile of. And he uses a different character pronounced Shi that means poop, crap, feces. The Shan character, mountain, remains the same. So instead of the characters in Chu Shishin's name being inscribed Stone Mountain, they become Pile Crap Mountain. The captain will use this name a couple times, and in order to highlight it, I'll use the adjective crappy along with it. Whenever you see the captain referring to Chu Shishin as crappy, you'll know that he's using the dad joke pun name. 2. The term used here, old grandpa, could theoretically imply that the old man is the grandfather or great-grandfather of Chu Shishin. More likely, it's just a term of respect for an elderly person, similar to how the heir apparent was called Old Grandpa. Chapter 843, The Fourth Statue, The God Defiler. Above the sprawling lands rose towering mountains. It looked like someone had casually scattered ink on rice paper, creating a beautiful landscape painting. Among all of the mountains was one specific mountain that rose higher than all the others. This was a holy peak to the fire moon dark heavens. It was called God Mountain. It looked almost like an ink brush pointing up into the dome of heaven. Countless clouds drifted past the base of the mountain, making it seem like a paradisiac island of immortals floating in the air. The sun shone down on the boulders and lush vegetation on the mountain, making it unusually dazzling and glorious. The mountain created a clear contrast to the sky behind it, ensuring that whether it was viewed from near or far, it was shocking to behold. Any who got close to it would sense a mountain-toppling, sea-draining energy poolsing off it. It was clearly just one mountain, but its mere existence seemed to make the dome of heaven become dim in comparison, to the point where it seemed capable of suppressing the sky itself. Xu Qing could be considered well-traveled, but even he had never seen anything like it. Its towering summit rose arrogantly high into the sky. It emanated golden light that, whether inherently or by the bolstering of the sun, spread out to fill the sky and cover the surrounding lands. Sensing the light caused Xu Qing's eyes to fill with a profound look. He could feel the power of gods in that golden light. It was a power that contained a certain level of mutagen. Although the mutagen was under control, it was free enough that it could be absorbed normally. He inhaled deeply, converting it into cultivation base power for himself. The captain stood next to Xu Qing, taking everything in, his eyes shining with reminiscence the entire time. He sighed. "Back again," he murmured in a low voice that only Xu Qing could hear. "Let's go, little junior brother. You really need to see this place." The captain patted Xu Qing's shoulder. Xu Qing suppressed his astonishment and glanced up at the over 1,800 forbidden mountains orbiting over him. The closer he got to God Mountain, the smaller they shrank down, until they were little more than black dots circling overhead. Though they were small, the vast number of them still made him very eye-catching. "With this many, I should take first place, right?" Xu Qing accelerated, becoming a beam of prismatic light that shot toward the mountain range ahead. God Mountain grew larger and larger from Xu Qing's perspective, until he couldn't even see the summit. It made him feel minute and powerless. Near the bottom of the mountain was a floating city made up of 3 smaller sub-cities. Each sub-city was grand and magnificent. They were connected by golden chains, and the immense amount of vegetation growing off of them made them seem very ancient. The cities were all roughly circular, conforming to the architectural style common among the species of ancient Emperor Dark Serenity's time. Nowadays, such architecture was rare, even among humankind. Sounding very excited, Master Gravesborough said, "This is the holy city of the Fire Moon Darkheaven people. It's called Heavenfire City. It's normally opened up to the public only during the Great Hunt and certain other important occasions. I had the great honor of being able to come here 3 times in the past. This is my 4th time here. Flying is prohibited in Heavenfire City, and all who come here are supposed to treat their visit like a holy pilgrimage." 1. Master Gravesborough continued to explain some of the other rules of the city as he led Xu Qing, and the captain toward one of the 3 small cities. Even from a distance, it looked like a bustling place filled with plenty of cultivators. According to Master Gravesborough, the majority of the people present were visitors. For the most part, the permanent residents were members of the temples. FGEEWEBNOVYAL. Their arrival attracted a lot of attention. Truth be told, humans were very rare here, And there was little need to mention that Xu Qing was already famous. Then there was his clash with Chu Shishan. As a result, his arrival was noticed immediately. The fact that he had over 1,000 forbidden mountains made him even more eye-catching. Xu Qing was used to such things already. As he landed in front of the city gates, his eyes shone. Taking a deep breath, he walked forward. The city gates obviously weren't designed with humans in mind. They were some 300 meters tall. Everything else in the city was similar. It was like a city made for giants. As Xu Qing looked around, he saw cultivators from hundreds of different species, many of them very bizarre and exotic. Fire Moon Darkheavens, who were rare outside, were actually the most common cultivators here. The majority of them wore white robes, and wherever they went, they were shown a great deal of respect. They didn't need to make any effort to seem lofty and aloof. It came naturally. Even back in the day, I hated their attitude, the captain muttered. Xu Qing didn't say anything, nor did he pay attention to any of the numerous gazes cast in his direction, many of which were hostile. He had something more important on his mind, and that was to turn in his mountains. By going to God Mountain and handing over his forbidden mountains, he could solidify his ranking. And thus, he looked at Master Gravesparrow. Master Gravesparrow had been paying close attention to Xu Qing while leading him on his journey. As a result, he knew exactly what Xu Qing meant by that look. Hurrying forward, he led the way. As countless people looked on, Xu Qing, the captain, and Master Gravesparrow proceeded through the city. Gossip immediately began to spread, and right about when they reached the halfway point, some Fire Moon Darkheaven cultivators stepped out in front of them and issued a challenge. Clearly, there were members of their species who weren't very happy that a human had acquired so many forbidden mountains in the first round. Xu Qing glanced at them. Seeing that they had no mountains orbiting over them, he ignored them. A few hours later, as the sun was beginning to set, Xu Qing arrived in front of God Mountain. 9 huge chains connected Heavenfire City to the mountain. By following the chains with one's gaze, it was possible to see a huge plaza complex high up on the mountain, where 3 massive divine likenesses of green stone existed. They represented the gods of sun, moon, and star. Behind the divine likenesses was a staircase that disappeared higher up on the mountain. There are 3 paths leading up God Mountain, Master Gravesparrow explained. They begin at Heavenfire City and lead to the 3 god plazas. Xu Qing nodded, looking away from God Mountain to the chains. Beneath them was a bottomless chasm. The wind caused the chains to slowly swing back and forth. Without any hesitation, Xu Qing walked forward and hopped onto one of the chains. After some thought, the captain chose to follow Xu Qing on the same chain. Master Gravesparrow was initially surprised, but then he picked one of the chains and hurried after them. Nothing unexpected happened. Eventually, Xu Qing reached the plaza complex where the 3 statues were. The first depicted High God Sunfire. It was hard to determine if High God Sunfire was male or female. The body seemed female, but the facial features were male. A sun rose behind the statue, and a host of evil ghosts were beneath its feet. The statue's eyes were closed. The second statue was in no way unfamiliar to Xu Qing. It depicted High God Moonfire. She was breathtaking, with an expression as cold as an iceberg. She was actually quite different from what Xu Qing remembered from the fight with Crimson Mother. There was a moon behind the statue, which cast cold moonlight that made the statue seem holy. Xu Qing was very familiar with the third statue. It was the clay fox, with stars behind the statue. The statue seemed extremely flirtatious, making it hard to look away from. However, what attracted Xu Qing's attention was not the 3 divine likenesses. Rather, it was the 4th statue. That statue was bowing to High God Moonfire. It was skinless and covered with whip marks and countless other wounds. There were even some blades stuck into the statue. From the look of things, High God Moonfire hated this statue with a deep passion, and as a punishment, forced it to endure humiliation and torment. Upon looking at the statue, the captain blinked a few times. Master Gravesparrow noticed that Xu Qing was looking at the 4th statue, so he quietly explained. That statue has a mysterious origin. It's been there for a very long time. My people call that statue the God Defiler. Legend has it that he defiled High God Moonfair and committed a heinous crime, making him wicked beyond redemption. High God Sunfair personally executed him, then chopped his fleshly body into pieces and turned them into this kneeling statue. 2. It's supposed to be a warning against others. What's even more noteworthy is that the official teachings of the Moonfire Temple mention the event. There's even a special holiday in the Moonfire Temple dedicated to cursing the god Defiler. Xu Qing looked at the captain. The captain's facial expression remained the same, and in fact, he seemed very intent on just listening to Master Gravesparrow. When he noticed Xu Qing looking at him, he turned with great curiosity to look at the fourth statue. Master Gravesparrow naturally had no way to know what Xu Qing and the captain were thinking about, so he decided to add something to his previous description. By the way, there's a rule when it comes to Heavenfire City and God Mountain, and that rule is that it's prohibited to bring an ox here. It's completely taboo. I have no idea why that rule exists, but I do know that if anyone brings an ox here, it will get killed immediately. In fact, any species even related to oxen in any way have mostly been exterminated by the Moonfire Temple over the years. Xu Qing looked at the captain again. Without a scrap of shame, the captain continued to look very curious. Therefore, Master Gravesparrow continued. Another thing, there's a taboo against having the character ox in your name. If you have that character in your name, you definitely shouldn't let anyone know about it. Say, fellow Taoists, do either of you have the character ox in your name? During their travels, he had obviously come to learn Xu Qing's name. However, he hadn't heard the name Chen Erniu at all. He just knew that Xu Qing called him eldest brother. 3. Xu Qing shook his head and looked yet again at the captain. The most up-to-date noves are published on FRYEWEBNO, Cyrillic letter 475EL. Co. The captain cleared his throat and quickly shook his head. Master Gravesparrow didn't think much of the situation and prepared to give some more information. Also, at long last, the captain couldn't continue his act. Glaring at Master Gravesparrow, he interrupted, "All right, we get the picture. Keep leading the way. Why are you jabbering so much?" 1. The author names the city, but then rarely refers to the actual name of the city. In some cases, I'll abide by his nomenclature, but in other instances I'm going to change the generic 3 cities into the actual name of the city. I'm doing that both for continuity and for ease of reading. There are many times when it makes the dialogue and narrative flow a lot more smoothly when the actual name of the city is used. Basically, it makes sense the way it is in Chinese, but when translated with 100% accuracy into English, it comes across clunky and weird in many cases. Incidentally, this is another instance in which I inadvertently created term crossover. Earlier in the story in the Moonfire region, we had Heavenfire as part of the story. In the case of this city, the character for fire is actually different. I could render this city differently, but the characters in the city are the same as those from the name of the species, Fire Moon Dark Heaven, so I think it's important to reflect that. In this case, there are 2 different characters that both can mean fire, which, if I had really been paying attention to, would have rendered differently, i.e. have one of them be fire and the other be flame, or something like that. Sorry about this. This tends to happen when 2 terms come up in different parts of the story, and my brain doesn't connect the parts until long after I've already set the translation choice. 2. I want to clarify that the Chinese term that I'm rendering defile does not inherently contain the same possible definition of the English term, i.e., to violate the chastity of. I could have used other terms like profane, desecrate, disrespect, blaspheme. I just felt that defile sounded best in the context, and also, it theoretically could contain the above English definition. There isn't really a way to tell for sure without further context. 3. I feel like the vast majority of you remember this, but for any who have forgotten, the captain's name Chen Erniu has the character ox in it. Niu means cow or ox. Chapter 844, Flags of Species on God Mountain. Master Gravesparrow was both surprised and a little embarrassed at the captain's angry outburst. What's wrong with this guy? I wasn't talking about him. All he had done was explain the rules of God Mountain, and therefore, couldn't figure out why Xu Qing's eldest brother would get so emotional. Then the speculations started. Of course, no matter what fanciful things he imagined, he couldn't possibly understand what was going on inside of Chen Erniu. However, it was obvious to him that the captain was irritated in some way, so Master Gravesborough simply put such thoughts aside and led them past the kneeling fourth statue and to the staircase beyond it. As Xu Qing walked past the statue of the god Defiler, he couldn't help but look over a bit more closely. The captain was right next to him. He rubbed his nose, looked at Xu Qing, cleared his throat, then projected a message via divine will. "Don't stare, little Ah Qing. How could I have guessed that after all these years, that not man, not woman, heaven-damned old fart Sunfire would do something as infuriating as this? Completely preposterous." The captain snorted. Xu Qing looked away from the statue as they neared the stairs, but then he couldn't suppress his curiosity and replied to the captain with divine will. "Eldest brother, if Moonfire or Sunfire realize you're here, is it possible they might slap you to death?" The captain's eyebrows shot up. "Why else do you think I got those wordless words before coming here? Don't worry. I have a foolproof plan at work. Sunfire is always asleep, and Moonfire is still digesting Crimson Mother's flesh. As for the slutty fox, it doesn't matter if her statue wakes up, as her true form is asleep. Besides, she likes a good show, so she won't interfere randomly. We're completely safe here." The captain thumped himself on the chest. Follow current novels on FRTAP, EEWEB and Cyrillic letter 473 VEL Retroflex. Com. Xu Qing sighed and started preparing mentally for things to go awry. Taking a deep breath, he stepped onto the stairs. The moment his foot touched the first stair, one of his over 1,800 forbidden mountains disappeared. It turned into a bright beam of light that merged into God Mountain. As that happened, something fantastic happened to God Mountain. A host of flags appeared on it. It was a visual ranking system that stretched the entire length of the staircase. The flags were different colors and had different designs embroidered on them. They were also different sizes. The higher up the flag, the bigger it was, and the easier it was to see. In fact, even people in the city were able to see the larger flags. Most of the flags were toward the bottom. There were tens of thousands of them. It seemed that 100 stairs was a major dividing point, as there were only about 2,000 flags after that point. Looking higher, it seemed that 500 stairs was a second dividing point, as there were only about 300 flags after that. Beyond that, the biggest flag was at about the 800th stair. It was huge and very eye-catching. With a bit of observation, it was possible to determine that once you passed stair number 300, about 80% of the flags belonged to Fire Moon Dark Heavens. Below that point were flags from all sorts of species. And now that Xu Qing had stepped onto the stairs, there was another flag there. It was a red flag, ordinary-sized and embroidered with mountains and rivers. However, the mountains and rivers seemed smashed and broken. That, combined with the blood-red color, made the flag seem somewhat depressing. It was the God Mountain flag that represented humankind. The moment it appeared, Xu Qing instinctively looked over at it. At the same time, Master Gravesborough quietly explained, "The last part of round 1 in the Great Hunt is to put your forbidden mountains into God Mountain. Every step you ascend will cause one of your forbidden mountains to disappear and become part of your flag of species. The flag of species will move with the cultivator as they ascend the stairs. When the last forbidden mountain disappears, the flag of species will be permanently located at that highest spot for that cultivator. The other flags of species are normally invisible. They only show up when someone comes to hand over their forbidden mountains." Master Gravesborough's forbidden mountain had also disappeared when he stepped onto the first stair, and another Fire Moon Darkheaven flag of species had appeared on God Mountain. Normally speaking, one forbidden mountain is enough to pass the first round and get you into the second. Only cultivators who are trying to take first place in round 1 will bother to collect a lot of mountains. The flags of species are automatically formed by God Mountain and conform to the characteristics of the specific species. Xu Qing nodded. Looking away from the human flag of species, he rose to the second stair. As he did, another mountain disappeared from over his head. The red flag with the mountains and rivers came with him and got slightly bigger, and thus he walked all the way to stair number 100. At that point, the red flag with the mountains and rivers was much larger. It actually stood out compared to many of the other flags. The larger the flag got, the more obvious it was that the mountains and rivers were broken. In fact, it was also possible to see corpses littering them. Xu Qing wasn't paying attention to that, though. Looking up the stairs at the other flags of species, he continued climbing. 200, 300, 400. When he reached stair number 500, there were tens of thousands of flags below him, and not many above. Because of how quickly he was ascending the stairs, all of the flags were clearly visible to everyone. And the fact that the bright red flag was getting bigger and bigger ensured that everyone was looking at it. Although many Fire Moon Dark Heaven cultivators had prepared themselves mentally for this, seeing it happen with their own eyes was still a shock. It's Xu Qing. I saw him earlier and could tell he was walking toward God Mountain. What hubris! I can't believe a human is hoisting their flag of species so high in our great hunt. It's all the fault of our species' chosen cultivators. None of them even tried to stop him. Well, there was Chu Shishin, but all he did was compete in sealing magic. If one of them had just stepped in, then this human wouldn't look so cocky. The Fire Moon Dark Heaven cultivators were obviously not very happy, and their antagonism was only growing stronger. Around that time, Xu Qing reached stair number 500. As he stood there with clouds drifting past, he looked up at the handful of flags higher up the stairs. More than 1,300 stairs to go. He started climbing again as fast as he could. Soon he reached stair number 600, then 700. Eventually, he reached what was previously the highest stair with a flag on it. He didn't stop. The red flag had now surpassed all of the Fire Moon Dark Heavens, flags of species, and was the most prominent flag on the mountain. And Xu Qing still had more stairs to climb. 900 stairs, 1,000 stairs. He moved quickly, and the red flag moved with him. More and more Fire Moon Dark Heaven cultivators were watching. As the red flag with the mountains and rivers got higher and higher, their hearts burned with increasing humiliation. As a superior species, it was only natural that the Fire Moon Dark Heaven cultivators were a proud lot. But in a moment like this, that sense of solidarity and pride as a species would only lead to increased shame. What was more, the human's flag of species wasn't just visible to ordinary cultivators. The Fire Moon leadership in Heavenfire City were all able to look up and see that flag with the mountains and rivers. Many an odd facial expression could be seen. In particular, there was the Fire Moon noble from the palace in the Forbidden Region. When he looked at Xu Qing on God Mountain and sensed the hostility from the cultivators of his species, he smiled broadly. Time passed, and the flag of mountains and rivers got higher and higher. 1,200 stairs, 1,400 stairs, 1,600 stairs. Finally, high above the clouds, on stair number 1,873, the red flag with mountains and rivers flapped in the wind. It was fully 3,000 meters wide, and was far beyond any of the other flags. Everyone could tell that countless heroic cultivators had been surpassed, and this seemed to be only a harbinger of what was to come. Nothing like this had ever happened in all of the great hunts that had occurred throughout the years. Never had a human taken first place in the first round. As the human's flag of species flapped in the wind, Heavenfire City below was completely silent. Countless eyes were fixed on the red flag, with mountains and rivers, that was now clearly visible on God Mountain. Xu Qing looked at the flag with a slightly dazed expression. He wasn't really sure how to describe his feelings. Eventually, he turned around and walked back down. As he descended, he could hear a commotion building in the city below. He didn't pay any attention to that. At the bottom of the staircase, he found the captain waiting for him. The captain grinned. What did it feel like to stand there? Xu Qing looked back at God Mountain. He shook his head. Sadly, I couldn't make it all the way to the top. The captain laughed. You did well enough. You've already pissed off the Fire Moon Dark Heavens to the point where they hate you. After all, you just planted your flag on their mountain. But the Fire Moon Dark Heaven leaders have achieved their goal. The reason they permitted you to show up and slaughter people left and right is that they want to light a fire under the current generation of cultivators here. To make a pack of wild dogs more vicious, you need a wolf to come in and rile things up. That's what'll really set them off. You, my friend, are the wolf, or, as I like to put it, the one who stirs crap up. As you can well imagine, there are going to be a lot of people watching you in the second and third rounds. Which is fine, right? That way you can have plenty of enemies to kill along the way. You come up with some great analogies, eldest brother, Xu Qing said coolly. The captain blinked a few times. Truth be told, he felt very pleased with himself at his perfect analogies. Let's go, the captain said. Little Gravesborough just told me that we'll have some downtime before the second round. We need to find a place to stay. Sadly, things here are really expensive. The upside is that all participants in the Great Hunt get a free mansion grotto. And of course, I can stay with you. We definitely can't let something like that go to waste. By the way, I also found out that the second round will be just as I expected. The Great Hunt will continue in the mountain and sea region. 1. The captain licked his lips. Believe you me, little Ah Ching, there are a lot of very delicious beasts in the mountains and sea region. Once you have a taste, you'll never forget it. 1. The mountain and sea reference here contains the same mountain and sea characters from I Shall Seal the Heavens. However, that doesn't inherently imply a connection. For one thing, we already had a mountain and sea reference in this very novel. Secondarily, the author draws very heavily on the classic of mountains and seas throughout his various works. I'm not saying definitively that there's no connection, but the mere mention is not sufficient to link the two. Chapter 845, Stranger in a Strange Land. Xu Qing wasn't sure exactly how many delicious beasts there were in the mountain and sea region. However, after arriving at the free mansion grotto the captain had mentioned, he finally got a first-hand understanding of how supercilious the Fire Moon Dark Heaven people were. During the Great Hunt, when Heavenfire City was opened up, everything was extremely expensive. After all, this location was the central core of Fire Moon Dark Heaven culture. The prices here were not the type that ordinary cultivators could afford. That was why Great Hunt participants were given free accommodations in the city. That said, residents in the city were housed based on strict requirements, and were actually categorized into first class, second class, and third class. Only Fire Moon Dark Heaven cultivators and some of the other superior species qualified to get first-class mansion grottos. Such mansion grottos had individualized spirit energy, a blessing from God Mountain, and had their own private courtyards. Whether in terms of the luxury of the surroundings or the suitability for cultivation, they were the highest quality possible. The second-class mansion grottos were set aside for the Fire Moon Dark Heavens, subsidiary species, and were much more utilitarian. The third-class mansion grottos were simple and crude, and were meant for inferior species from the outside who were participating in the Great Hunt. It didn't matter that Xu Qing had placed his flag of species at the highest spot on God Mountain, thus clinching first place. He still didn't qualify for a first or even second-class mansion grotto. He had to pick from the third-class ones. In some cases, the strength or weakness of a species would be reflected onto an individual member of that species. The only exception would be someone who was so incredibly strong they could rise above the reputation of their species. Unfortunately, Xu Qing was not yet at that level. To the Fire Moon Dark Heaven people, any species who refused to be subsidiary to them was considered an inferior species. Not even Master Gravesborough could do anything to change that. Nonetheless, he officially requested if he could transfer his first-class mansion grotto to Xu Qing. The Fire Moon Dark Heaven cultivator in charge of the mansion grottos was obviously not very pleased when Master Gravesborough brought Xu Qing with him and asked to make an exception. Frowning deeply, he said, "Absolutely not. He can stay in his assigned place or he can find somewhere else. Those are the rules here." The Fire Moon Dark Heaven cultivator tossed a command medallion to Xu Qing, then closed his eyes and ignored him. Master Gravesborough sighed inwardly. Looking at Xu Qing, he lowered his voice and said, Fellow Taoist Su, it's getting late. Once the sun sets, the night curfew will start, and that's coming soon. Xu Qing didn't really care what kind of accommodations he had. However, after hearing about the curfew, he scanned the surroundings with divine will. Though the sun was about to set, there were still a lot of people on the streets. It didn't seem very much like there was a curfew about to start. The curfew is for non-fire moons, right? The captain said. He hefted the mansion grotto command medallion. It's free, so you have to stay there. If you don't, it would be a big waste. Xu Qing retracted his divine will and nodded to Master Gravesparrow. With the captain leading the way using the command medallion, they left. Master Gravesparrow clasped hands and bowed, all while sighing inwardly. Having followed Xu Qing for such a long time, he was fully aware of the shocking level of his battle prowess. It seems to me he's only in the great circle of spirit trove, but he already has 4th stage void returning battle prowess. If a chosen like that was a fire moon Darkheaven, he would be extremely popular and would be considered favored by the heavens. What a pity. It's really too bad. Master Gravesparrow sighed as he watched Xu Qing, and the captain disappear down the street. Eventually the sun set and the moon rose. Xu Qing and the captain had already found the mansion grotto he'd been assigned. In reality, it wasn't actually a mansion grotto. It was more like a simple apartment, and it was in a remote location. That said, Xu Qing had never been one to worry much about where he stayed. Even if the apartment had been more crude, it was much better than the hovel where he had lived as a kid in the slums in South Phoenix. Once inside, Xu Qing sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes to meditate. The captain also didn't seem to care much about their accommodations. He took out a jade slip and started sending messages to unknown recipients, and in that manner, the night passed. The next morning at dawn, the captain winked and said, "Good morning, little Ah Qing. I asked around and found out that the 2nd round starts in a month. We've got plenty of time on our hands. You just rest up while I work on gathering intelligence. I also have some personal matters to attend to." The captain licked his lips, and his eyes gleamed with anticipation and excitement. It reminded Xu Qing of when he was young and saw people in the scavenger base camp walking toward the feathered tents. The most up-to-date noves are published on FRYEWEBNO, Cyrillic letter 475EL, Co. "Just be careful," Xu Qing said. "Don't worry, seriously," the captain said, smacking his chest in the customary fashion. "Thanks to the wordless Book of Stone, no one can possibly detect my aura." Rubbing his hands together, he left. Xu Qing shook his head and went back to meditating. A few days passed. Xu Qing never went out, and the captain never came back. Thanks to the time spent resting and recovering, Xu Qing's exhaustion from all the slaughter had finally passed. Might as well go for a walk. I wonder what kind of information I can buy about the mountain and sea region. With that, he left his residence. During the days that had passed, more flags had appeared on God Mountain. Not one was as high as Xu Qing. As a result, the Fire Moon Darkheaven cultivators were becoming increasingly irritated. To look up and see that flag of mountains and rivers flapping high above all the other flags filled them with discontent regarding Xu Qing. That negative attitude was plainly visible in the eyes of the people who spotted Xu Qing as he strolled through the city. Xu Qing didn't care. As he walked along, he heard bits and pieces of malicious conversation, but he chose to ignore them. The 1st round was almost over, and there wasn't any point in getting into fights without the possibility of getting more forbidden mountains. Besides, there were just too many people saying malicious things. Maybe he could kill some of them, but he definitely couldn't kill all of them. Quite a few people stepped out to challenge him, but he didn't think that any of them were worth it. "Hey, human, Xu Qing!" All of a sudden, a jade slip flew out of the crowd to hover in front of him. Behind it, a young member of one of the Fire Moon's subsidiary species stepped out and stared coldly at Xu Qing. "How dare you walk around this holy city? I hereby challenge you to a fight to the death." Xu Qing looked at him, saw nothing of value, and kept walking. The young man hadn't actually been interested in fighting to the death. He was just taking advantage of the moment to earn some notoriety. He chuckled coldly as he watched Xu Qing walk away. Similar challenges occurred frequently, and it was starting to annoy Xu Qing. That feeling intensified when he realized that the shops in the city were also categorized into grades and ranks, and there were some who refused to do business with him. The revulsion and malice being shown to him, and all the challenges, caused his gaze to turn ice cold. He knew full well that all he had to do was take out the identity medallion from the clay fox, and he could resolve any such situations instantly. That medallion would allow him to enter any shop and buy anything he wanted. But after glancing at God Mountain, he decided not to use the medallion. Instead, he sent a voice message to Master Gravesparrow. Then he returned to his residence. He was only there for a short time before Master Gravesparrow arrived with a host of information about the mountain and sea region. They hadn't seen each other for a few days. After handing over the information, Master Gravesparrow bowed and left with a complicated look on his face. Xu Qing took note of that expression. It wasn't hard to put himself in Master Gravesparrow's shoes and understand the general reason for his disposition. He was a Fire Moon Darkheaven, but he had spent a lot of time following around two humans that everyone seemed to hate. Presumably, he had dealt with the same type of sarcastic comments that Xu Qing had heard over the past few days. As Xu Qing thought back to everything he had experienced so far in the city, he felt even more irritated. Finally, he started studying the jade slips Master Gravesparrow had brought with the information about the second round of the Great Hunt. The second round would be held in the mountain and sea region. It was a special location because it wasn't inhabited by cultivators from any species. Instead, it was full of innumerable mutant beasts. Some lived isolated lives, while others roved about in groups. For countless years, the Fire Moon Darkheavens had been relocating beasts into the region, where they bred and proliferated. All sorts of mutant variations existed, including gruish creatures and animals that couldn't be found anywhere else. For instance, the ghost chariot Xu Qing and the captain saw some time before came from there. The jade slip about the mountain and sea region didn't contain any information about how the region came to be. There were only a few scattered passages that hinted at the origin, and they related to some of the oldest legends of the Fire Moon Darkheaven people. That said, Xu Qing wasn't particularly curious about such things. He mostly wanted to know about the most famous beasts from the place, as well as information about their habitats. After perusing the information, Xu Qing identified the top-ranked beast. It was called a Nindons. It had a special place in Fire Moon Darkheaven culture. Throughout the entire history of their species, there had only been one instance in which someone tamed a Nindons. Specifically, it was the very first ancestral chief of the Fire Moon Darkheavens, who was also the Grand Steward who led them to prominence. His mount was a Nindons. After that time period, no one had ever succeeded in taming one. Because of that, Fire Moon Darkheaven cultivators held the Nindons in the highest regard. Some even said that whoever tamed a Nindons would earn the respect of the entire species and would be worshipped by all the subsidiary species. There were a lot of stories about the Nindons. However, none of them contained very many details. In fact, it wasn't even clear if the Nindons was a solitary species or if they lived in groups. According to the Jade Slip, there were some old-timers among the Fire Moon cultivators who knew how to tame a Nindons. However, their gods had set forth very specific rules regarding the mountain and sea region. Specifically, it wasn't permitted to go into the region except on special occasions. In fact, it was only during the Great Hunt that their gods would open the place. That was when the Great Hunt participants could go in and find mutant beasts to tame as mounts. Because of that limitation, it had been many, many years since a Nindons was even seen. The Nindons were known to live in a location that had come to be called the Nindons' Forbidden Lands. According to the Jade Slip, it was an extremely dangerous location that few people made it out alive. 1. Nindons. After going through all the information about the Nindons, Xu Qing had the lingering feeling that some of the information was contradictory. There's definitely more to this story, but what? Xu Qing thought about it for a moment. What kind of beasts are these Nindons? Do they really have something to do with 9 lanterns? 2. 1. The Nine Dawn's Forbidden Lands does not follow the same naming convention as the Forbidden Regions or Forbidden Grounds. However, it does contain the same forbidden character, thus my translation choice. As for what exactly it is, you'll have to wait to find out. 2. The final line is a reference to the information the captain gave Xu Qing in chapter 822. The top-voted comment for this passage was a screenshot from the Gen novel, A World Worth Protecting chapter 955, in which the protagonist Wang Baiao encountered a young man with violet hair, surnamed Xu, who had 9 lanterns floating around him. Most readers believe that this young man was Xu Qing, and that the 9 lanterns here are somehow related to that.